Good morning, dear students. Once again, welcome back to the English literature class. Here we are continuing with the poem which we were discussing from the last class onwards. Unit number 4, After Blenheim, written by Robert Southey. Today we are going to discuss about the different literary devices used by the poet in this poem to beautify the poem. First of all, we are going to discuss about the different themes used in the poem. And the first theme is man's cruelty to man. War is the worst state of human behavior. We can never justify a war by any means. Because in a war there is no winners, but all are users. So in such a state, how can we justify a war? For whatever reasons, if a country is fighting with one another country, ultimately who is getting success in the war? Nobody. Both the countries has to face the destructions, the loss and the sufferings. So war is the worst state of human behavior. And in this poem we can see whenever Mr. Old Casper walks in the field, he is getting the bones and skulls of those soldiers who died in the war. And it is the best example of a mute testimony to the horrors of war. Because those soldiers are not going to speak again. Ultimately, they lost their life. They lost everything. They are not going to complain. They are not going to argue. They are mute forever. So that's why this poem is a mute testimony to the horrors of war. So those bones and skulls are the evidence of the war, and they are not going to speak again. Man kills another man to achieve great victory. What justification we could give if a man kills another man to achieve something? Here in the case of a country, if a country is fighting with one another country and says that it was a great victory, what base that particular statement has got? The interest of the ruler is being enforced on the other people or the rest of the people. The ruler will be having some personal interest or some personal benefit, but who has to suffer? Man kills another man to achieve great victory. If we take the example, or if we consider about the army men, they just follow the instructions from their superiors and they just kill others. They are not getting any benefit. So man kills another man to achieve great victory. The second theme which we are going to see in this poem is curiosity and lack of it. Children are curious. Whenever they see something new, whenever they get something new, they will be having number of questions and doubts about it. Here, the children asked grandfather about the skull. When they were playing in the ground, they have got a skull. And they are asking their grandfather about the skull because it was something new to them. They have never seen such a thing in their life. That's why they are asking their grandfather about it. But he was unable to explain the benefits of the war. He elaborated it further. He told a number of things about war. But none of those explanation was about the benefits of the war. He was not able to explain the benefits of the war. And he was not able to rectify the curiosity of those children. He was not able to clear their doubts. So, children are curious and they ask their grandfather about the skull, but he was unable to explain the benefits of the war. Curiosity and lack of it. That is the second theme. And the third theme explained in this poem is complacency. Old Casper accepts that people do die in wars to achieve great victory. In every stanza we can see this particular attitude of the poet or the attitude of old Caspar, we can say, because he was justifying the people who died in the war, the people who lost their houses, the children who lost their parents. So from every aspect he was trying to justify it. Old Caspar accepts. So all those points were leading towards this particular concept. Old Caspar agrees that people do die in wars to achieve great victory. If a nation has to get great victory, the people has to sacrifice something, maybe their life. Repetition of the lines is saying that it was a great victory. In number of stanzas, by the end of number of stanza, we can see this particular phrase. It was a great victory, and it is telling that old Caspar is right, and he accepts that people do die in war to achieve great victory, but ignorant of the causes of the war. So by the end of the stanza, this particular phrase is used, but what does it mean? He told the negative aspects of the war. From his words, it is very clear that battle or the war is an evil. But at the same time, he is concluding each stanza with the phrase, it was a great victory. And why he has told so? It is just because he was ignorant of the causes of the war. He was not knowing even for what purpose the rulers they fought each other. It referred with an impersonal phrase. So his ignorance or the casualty took place due to the war, or the destructions took place in the war, is referred in the poem with an impersonal phrase. It is collateral damage. It was stated something like a quite natural. It was something like a coincidence. Something happened naturally, or how can I explain it? It referred with the impersonal phrase collateral damage. So these are the three different themes explained in this poem. Now we are coming to the next part of the literary devices, and that is style. The different styles used in the poem. That's what we are going to see the next. First one, form and structure. What all kinds of forms are used in this poem and the structure of the poem. That's what we are going to evaluate first. It's an anti-war poem. So throughout the poem, the author is trying to communicate to the reader that war is not something good. It's an anti-war poem. It's the form of ballad. Ballad means a long narrative poem that tells a story. You might have heard about the famous epic poem of Homer. The title of the poem is Iliad and Odyssey. And what's the speciality of that? It's a very long narrative poem, and in that poem the author is Homer, and he is explaining about the heroic activities of the famous Greek king Odysseus. So when we go through the poem, we will feel like we are reading a story. So that's the speciality of ballad. So this particular poem is also having the feature of a ballad. And rather than this, the author has used number of narrative techniques, different narrative techniques he has used. And in the next upcoming classes, we will come to know about it. So it is a story of Caspar and his two grandchildren engaged in conversation about the famous battle. So this is the theme of the story. Actually, we have seen in this poem, it is telling a story, and this story's theme is about the conversation between old Caspar and his two grandchildren. So the entire poem is revolving around this conversation between Caspar and his two grandchildren. and they are discussing about a famous battle. Now next one, when we discuss about the form and structure, we need to know one more point, that is refrain. Refrain means a refrain is a phrase, verse or group of verses repeated at intervals throughout the poem. Certain phrases or certain verses or group of verses are being repeated at intervals throughout the poem. It is being known as a refrain, especially at the end of each stanza. Such an usage we could see in this poem here, that which are the great victory, a famous victory. So these phrases are used in this poem in different intervals, especially at the end of each stanza. So refrain is one another structure or the form which is used in the story of old Casker and the two grandchildren. So this poem is having this particular structure also. It is used to emphasize the ignorance and complacency. So ignorance behind the reason of the battle. So old Caspar is not able to explain what was the reason behind it. So in order to hide all these points, these kinds of phrases are used in the poem. And the second point which comes under the style is rhyming schemes used in the poem. In this poem, the poet is used end rhyme in each stanza except in second stanza. When you remember about the rhyming scheme of this poem, you have to remember one thing. In the second stanza, there is no rhyming scheme used by the poet, and except in second stanza, in all other stanza, the author used the rhyming scheme. And the rhyming scheme is A, B, C, D, D, D. So this particular rhyming scheme is used in this poem. And the third point is alliteration. What do you mean by alliteration? Repetition of a speech sound in a sequence of nearby words, usually to the consonant sounds. It is a repetition of a speech sound in a sequence of nearby words, usually to the consonant sounds. Let's see. See here, you could see certain words are in red color. Certain letters are in red color. Tell, towards, pitokin. Again, little, Wilhelmine, looks. With, wonder, waiting. War, what. Fort, ford. See different consonant sounds like t, l, w, then f. These kinds of words are used in a sequence of nearby words, and it is a consonant sound as well. So repetition of such sounds are being known as alliteration. Now about the repetition. Certain things are repeated in the poem in different places, especially by the end of almost each stanza. Phrases like the great victory, a famous victory. So we have already seen this particular point in the previous part of this class. So I am not going to explain it again. So repetition of certain phrases by the end of almost each stanza, like the great victory, a famous victory. Now the last point is irony. What do you mean by irony? A statement or expression whose intended meaning is quite the contrary to the literal meaning. So when we read a sentence, it will be expressing a literal meaning, but the intended meaning will be just opposite to that, contrary to the literal meaning. That's what is irony. Here in this poem, once when we go through it, we can understand that it is an anti-war poem. It is a poem which is speaking against the war, and the usages like or the different words are telling that it is an anti-war poem, like depicts burned houses, civilian casualties, destructions. All these points are, or all these words are telling that it is an anti-war poem. At the same time, ironically glorifies the outcome of the war. We have already seen by the end of every stanza it is telling that it was a great victory. So the intended meaning is quite contrary to the literal meaning. Literal meaning means it is speaking about the burned houses, the casualties of civilians, destructions, the people who died in the war. So different things are being explained. At the same time, ironically glorifies the outcome of the war, which means it is explaining like great victory, famous victory. So dear students, these are the different literary devices used by the poet in the poem to beautify it. And I hope that you have got a very clear idea about the poems which I have explained today. And in the next class, we will be beginning with the chapter. Till then, I would like to sign off. Thank you.